Hello, Professor Tiller.
Hello and good afternoon.
I'm in Hawaii. Where are you right now?
Now I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Ah, love Scottsdale. Beautiful place.
Yes, well, we were in Maui also last week. We got back on the 19th.
Uh-huh. And what is the
So
background behind you? Because you're in front of a painting, aren't you?
we're in a chapel. This is a spiritual center and church, and that's the frontispiece of the chapel.
Ah, beautiful. So
Yeah.
we had a conversation a long time ago, but it wasn't through video. It was on the phone, and I'm very happy today. This is on camera.
Okay.
This is wonderful.
Yeah, well, I'm glad too.
So I would love to speak about the psychoenergetic science, because this is your thing, and I would love to learn more about it. Can you give us a bit of your background and how you came to this kind of science and what it is and how it can help us to bridge what we feel inside, but we haven't yet explained it scientifically on this end of normal, regular people?
Right. Okay. I was in industry for 9 years at the Westinghouse Research Lab as an advisory physicist, and then moved to being a full professor with tenure at Stanford University in 1964, and retired from Stanford University in 1998. My last Ph.D. student was in 2000. Generally, my teaching was graduate students rather than undergraduate students, and I had research people. I probably graduated 50 PhD students in that time period that I was there. So I'm a card-carrying orthodoxe scientist. And when I was on my first tour of duty on sabbatical, although I started out as a garden variety professor, the man who brought me in turned very ill, and I was asked to take over as department chair, which I did until I decided to give that up in 1970. Going on sabbatical, I picked up this little book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder, and I knew a great deal about that area, because my wife and I became daily meditators in 1964. And we had lots of experiences with psychic phenomena and people. Even though I was department chair, I was still interested in this other. And as I read this book on the plane to my sabbatical, or our sabbatical in Oxford, the thought kept coming into my mind: how might the universe be structured to allow this crazy seeming kind of stuff to naturally coexist with the orthodox science that I was doing every day with my graduate students? When I got to Oxford, I started to write the book I went there to write on my orthodox area, which was science of crystallization. And I kept having this same question come into my mind. And it was very distracting. And after about 3 weeks, I decided I'm not going to do this book. I'm going to find out, if I can, how the universe might be constructed to allow this stuff to exist. And so my wife and I, with our daily meditation, which was usually about an hour long, we would go into meditation, and I would hold the brick of the question: how might this universe be structured to allow this stuff to occur? And by the end of the day, end of the hour, usually I'd have some insight, and she would have some insight, and we'd talk a bit, because her insight, although she was not in any way scientific, was always very fruitful. Females are better at psychic stuff than males. And then I'd work all day upstairs in the house we had, trying to decide what experimental data was this insight violating. And by the end of the day, I would have another set of questions. And so the next day I would go into meditation. I'd hold the primary intention or question, and then I would hold these other questions, just like a brick, like a supplicant, asking the universe for help in understanding. And this went on every day. I do it for 6 months. We did it every day. By the end of the 6 months, I had a model that allowed the two to naturally coexist. But one of the key issues of enlightenment that came was you must get outside of distance time to understand how these two things can naturally coexist. Well, by that time, I was really impressed with how important this area of work is, mankind. Much more important than I thought my normal science was at Stanford. And so I thought, who might I get to commit to working on this, seriously working on it? And I finally decided I couldn't figure out who could do it, and that it had to be me. Well, that was tough. I needed my day job to feed my family. So I decided to give up being department chair to have time. I decided to give up my government committees to have time. I decided to give up my professional committees to have time. And with that block of time, I divided it into 3 parts. Continued experiential development of self. Second, third was to keep looking at the universe to see what the structure looked like, and ultimately mathematically what it might look like. And then the third was to do experiments to keep the theory honest. And so I developed an inside the university life of conventional science and an outside the university life of psychoenergetic science. And so that was in 1970, and I have been doing that ever since. The university was not happy with it, but I was a tenured professor, fortunately, and therefore, so long as I did my day job well, I was still allowed to be a full professor with tenure. So that was good, but it's a lonely life in a sense because there's a natural separation when you're walking a different path than the pack. Now, I walked the path of orthodox science quite well in my daily work, but I had this other, and I would have phone calls from people all around the world who thought they were going crazy or whose family thought they were going crazy, and I would describe to them the research work that was being done to how to understand what they were going through, their internal transformation. And then in a half an hour later, I had to switch from that mode of reality to be prepared for my lecture. So it was a stretch, but it was an interesting adventure. And I wouldn't have changed a thing.
And so how have you evolved since then? I mean, because really these intention prove now to change, as you say on your site and as you say in lecture, our physical reality.
Yes.
So how?
Okay. What I did first, I didn't get into the serious intention. Although the first book I wrote was, which came out in 1997. It was called Science and Human Transformation: Subtle Energies, Intentionality, and Consciousness. So I continued that, gathering data in that area for 20 years. Basically 20 years until I received some funding, serious funding, from a philanthropist, and who is dead now. But so I was able to put together a team, and the work that's best known is the intention work. There had been, since the 1600s, the assumption of Descartes that no human qualities of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. Now, at the time, that was a very useful assumption because, of course, it was only a century away from having a theocratic society, and logos switched to science, distance time science, after Copernicus and Galileo and then Newton. But there's always a long hangover from one paradigm to another. And so he made this assumption in order that science, physics, natural phenomena could be clearly separated from religion. So it was a useful assumption at that time. But no one ever studied the assumption after that, except that it stuck with orthodox science and orthodox medicine. So unconsciously, this exists in these folks. And so I decided I will use this money to seriously test this assumption of Descartes. So I designed, with all of the procedures I use for my normal Stanford work, 4 target experiments. And the first one was to increase the pH of water. That's the alkaline-acidic balance of water by 1 full pH unit. That's a factor of 10 of hydrogen ion concentration. It's a reduction in hydrogen ion concentration by a factor of 10. That's very large. In the human body, if you were doing this with the blood, if you increase the pH by a half a pH unit or reduce it by a half a pH unit, you're dead on both ends. So, and we're seeing this kind of thing now with the CO2 concentration growing in the atmosphere, that gets into the oceans and that is killing the corals. And so it's a big deal, a 1 pH unit. For biological systems, 1/10 of a pH unit is the death knell for many of them. So it's important. Anyway, the second experiment was to take the same water and decrease the pH by 1 full pH unit, again with no chemical additions. The third experiment, I should say that we found a way to imprint an intention into a simple electrical device from a deep meditative state. And when we would do that, not only do we change the physical properties of things, we change the physical reality of the space. The space becomes conditioned in a very special way, like the great cathedrals of Europe, and more than that. So the third thing was to condition a space, and the experiment was to take a specific liver enzyme, alkaline phosphatase, and the intention was to significantly increase the chemical activity. That's a little more than chemical concentration, but it's something like that. The chemical activity by a 30-minute exposure to the conditioned space. We measured the chemical activity before the experiment. We measured it after 30-minute exposure. So that was the third experiment. The fourth experiment was to take a living system, and this was fruit fly larvae, and the intention here was to increase the energy storage molecule relative to its chemical precursor. That's ATP to ADP. That is to increase from 2 phosphorus atoms in the molecule to 3 phosphorus atoms in the molecule. And that would make the fruit fly larva more physically fit and therefore shorten the larval development time to the adult fly stage. That was our assumption. Okay, so that was the fourth experiment. All the experiments were robustly successful. And the 2 biological ones, they were successful to the point of a p-value better than 0.001. That is less than 1 chance in 1,000 that this could have occurred by a random chance. Those were the 4 target experiments. They were so successful, and that unequivocally proved that the basic assumption of Descartes no longer holds in today's world. However, how to get the orthodox science community or medical community to look at the experimental data? It's basically the same way it was with Galileo back in his time. The theocrats were not willing to look at through his telescope at his experimental data. Same thing today. It's unfortunate. It'll happen. It will change because the data is mounting more and more and more. The general public love it because they see hope that isn't there in the orthodox science or orthodox medicine, which are both very materialistic.
Yeah, and we feel it as non-scientific people. We feel it
Yes.
in our heart. We know it.
Absolutely.
And we cannot prove it. And there is the separation between the people can feel that there's so much more and that we're all united. We're all linked through this huge field of consciousness.
And it turns out the more the space is conditioned, the more these experiments go, the greater is the connectivity. We found that there is another level of physical reality. It's in the coarsest level of the physical vacuum. Physical vacuum is where all of this stuff is. It's where all of the higher qualities of humans are. Quantum mechanics, for example, is a distance-time second-order differential equation, which means it can deal with the meat of humans, but it can't deal with those special qualities, emotions, mind, spirit. We need to expand the reference frame we're using to study nature. And the Orthodox community, they've known about this category of phenomena, of psychic phenomena, for 1 to 2 centuries. But since it doesn't satisfy their internal self-consistency requirements of orthodox science, they either have to change their attitudes and their way of doing experiments, or they have to sweep it under the rug. Unfortunately, they've chosen to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah,
and that's been going on for a long time.
Because the way it's set up, from my understanding, it's impossible to move forward in the science. The science can evolve too, but it's not possible through its current methodology. So how do you see all of this opening up? Is it just a matter of
they have to. They're stuck. They're terribly stuck, and they're doing a good job with materialistic science. But as far as humans are concerned, they are not doing anything. And with what is there, they are not going to be able to do anything. They have to go to another level of reality. They have to get out of the box. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of afraid, to get out of the box. It changes everything. Universities are the same. Universities won't allow this stuff to be taught, to get a Ph.D. degree in this. Now, it's understandable. There aren't jobs for such people. So it'll be a while before we have converted, and my work is starting to move in that direction, is to try to show that you can have a business and make profit and create new things using these procedures. But in general, people have to build themselves, and the people they pay for all the research that goes on in universities. Therefore, they eventually can demand what kind of material they want to be taught. And when that happens, then governments and universities will begin to open that door. In the meantime, I'm trying to open that door with doing hard research that expands this consciousness, shows the data. We have learned also how to broadcast this and broadcast intention over 6,000 miles. We've done experiments, one of the most recent ones, to a particular room in a particular building on a particular corner of Berlin, Germany. They had the same kind of equipment that we had there, but we imprinted the device. They had an unimprinted device, and we broadcast using a subtle energy from Payson, Arizona. It's up in the mountains, about 80 miles from here. And it was remarkably successful. So that means now that we can broadcast and change the intention. We did an experiment to heal hundreds of people with depression and anxiety, separated by thousands of square miles, just by their name and address being continuously scrolled through a computer in the room where there was an intention host device. The control system had everything the same, except it wasn't an intention imprinted device. Nothing happened.
So instead of being human beings thinking that same thought and holding that same intention, you're saying you're able to reproduce it through those computers that are sending those...
Yes. If people, you have to understand, people have to hold the same intention, but they have to be coherent. Most people are not very coherent, and they may think they're holding the intention. Okay?
You meet with
That's
the heart coherence.
It's a heart connection, yes, but can you do it reproducibly in a quantitative way every day? That's the issue. That's why I chose to use a simple electronic device, a device in which I could imprint an intention. And I found the very first time I did that, I took the device, which I call an intention host device, that had been imprinted, and I separated it by about 100 meters from an unimprinted device, identical, physically identical, but unimprinted, and turned them both off electrically. So there should be no change, because there's no electrical information signal. But within 3 to 5 days, the unimprinted device picked up the imprint, which says that there's another level of nature that we access with our device, and that can broadcast. It seems to be unlimited, but I don't know that. I only know 6,000 miles is as far as I've tried to go. But my intuition is that we can broadcast simultaneously to thousands of people, millions of people, anywhere in the world. At the moment, we're working with hundreds. One of the things that we are setting in motion is to broadcast to children diagnosed as autistic and a different intention to their parents. The children appear to have this difficulty because they're advanced souls who have a need for greater infrastructure in their bio-body suits. Bio-body suit is what we're wearing. So it's like a diving bell. Needs instrumentation so you can experience the environment. These souls need something more advanced than that, because I think they're forerunners of what is coming for all of us. That is, we've sort of finished not quite finished, but we're wrapping up the epoch that we're in. And I think the Higgs boson experiments sort of wrap up that conventional reality, which is everything goes slower than the velocity of light. Now we go to the vacuum and everything goes faster than light. And so we do not have conventional instruments to access that information. We have some when we're working on others so that we can access those levels of the physical vacuum. So I think of I call it the ladder of understanding that we have worked on for 400 years on the lowest rung of the ladder and built it very well. But now we need to stretch a little further, and that's what our work is doing. Psychoenergetics science works on the second rung of the ladder. And so we're hanging on by our fingertips, we're making some progress, and it will change our reality.
I was interviewing somebody recently, a few months ago in Geneva, that works very closely to autistic kids, and he was saying that it's very easy for them to go out of their body, and they experience a lot more things. Actually,
but it's hard for them to get back into their body.
Yeah,
that's the problem, and so that's what my intention statement will be working on.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. What can we expect in the futures to how human beings, what we're developing and what we can really start to work on to be able to be in these fast times and these changes?
Let me tell you what my fundamental working hypothesis is, I think we are all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-body suits and put us in this playpen, which we call a universe, in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, and in order to become what we were intended to become, which is co-creators with our spiritual parents. When I say co-creators, I mean big-time stuff. But that's the way down the road. We are just babes crawling across the floor of the universe at the moment. And we have a long way to grow. A long, long way to grow. And the general public is starting to really work on it. And that's wonderful. And because they are, the orthodox community will change with the data that we provide, eventually. Eventually, they will not be able to withstand the general public. So we are, let me give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
Let's take a 60-watt light bulb. Okay, it gives a bit of light, not a lot of light. And the reason it doesn't give a lot of light is because the photons that come out of the light bulb interfere with each other. You get what's called destructive interference. However, if you could influence those photons so that they became coherent with each other, so that they come out riding on each other's back, then the energy density at the surface of the light bulb would be close to 100 times the surface of the sun. We are like that light bulb, quite incoherent, mostly asleep, but we can be that coherent source, and that's part of where we're going. Let me give another example. A great physicist, John Wheeler, passed on now, astrophysicist, really great. He calculated that for quantum mechanics and relativity theory to be internally self-consistent, the vacuum, the physical vacuum, had to contain an energy density of something like 10 to the power 94 grams equivalent of electromagnetic energy per cubic centimeter. Well, that's a big number. What does it mean? From astronomers, we can get an average density of electromagnetic matter in the cosmos. Cosmos is a sphere of about 15 billion light years radius. So you multiply the average energy density, mass density of electromagnetic energy, times that volume, and you get a number, a very big number. Now let's take the Wheeler calculation. We take that number and we multiply it by the volume, the physical volume of a single hydrogen atom. That's like 1 over 1 followed by 22 zeros. When you multiply those two together, you get another number, and that number is 1 trillion times the other number. That is, it's 1 trillion times more latent energy than all of the electromagnetic mass in all of the stars and all of the planets and all of the cosmic dust in our entire cosmos. That is our future. That, in fact, is the coarsest level of that is what we are addressing. We are able to meaningfully touch that aspect of physical reality where things are starting to go faster than light. That's our future. That's how we're really going to go to the stars. That's how we're really going to help us become. And it is by learning to meditate or do Qigong. These are practices. These are practices that you do from deep within. The more you do, the more you become. And the more you become, everything changes and everything gets connected. Well, for example, let's take the placebo effect in medicine. 30 years ago, it was practically zero, maybe 5%. In the last 30 years, it's become something like 95%. How can that be if a placebo is inert? Well, it turns out when you look at the connectivity that has been occurring because of these subtle energies. And in particular, what I call the coupler, which lets us cause slower than light matter to interact with faster than light matter. When that kind of thing occurs, then it turns out you can't treat a placebo as inert, because the mathematics shows you that a placebo, its functionability, its effect, is multiplied by the doctor's intention, it's multiplied by the treatment, it's multiplied by the patients. So that's why the placebo is getting close to the treatment result. It's because it's a vector sum that is required. It can't be treated as a mathematical scalar. So this is going to change everywhere. Controlled, double-blind controls, forget it. It's not going to happen in the future because we are getting more connected. Everything is getting connected because this coupler is not just growing in our experiments, it's growing in the cosmos. That's what the placebo results are showing us. That coupler is growing in magnitude. And we're on our way to some other great adventure.
I love the word adventure because it also means stepping in this unknown. And we know that once we step in this unknown, not just really not knowing, amazing things happen. How do you put that together in scientific terms? What is your research showing? Why is that so magical?
The research is showing that all the action is not going on in distance time. And orthodoxe science is distance time only. As I said, a second order differential equation is what is the best that quantum mechanics, present day quantum mechanics, can do. I mean, it's not completed. Relativity theory is not completed. Einstein's limitation of the velocity of light is shown. You can begin to show that that's not the end. Once you have another level of physical reality, I call it the fine physical reality versus the coarse physical reality. That means that as you increase the energy up going towards the velocity of light, you don't have to go all the way to the velocity of light. It'll just tunnel through into the faster than light domain, which also responds to relativity theory. And relativity theory fits faster than light and slower than light. There's just trouble at the light barrier. And if you have only the one domain, well, you would just keep trying to go to the velocity of light, which takes more energy, takes an infinite amount of energy, so it's never going to happen. And that's why Einstein said what he said, that you can't go faster than light. But as soon as you show that nature has another level, or at least one other level of reality, and all I'm showing is the second rung of the ladder. But that's enough. You can tunnel through. So it means that if our physics community would open their mind to the possibilities and look at some of the data that exists, they can explain dark matter and dark energy. They'll be able to explain why there's acceleration at the edge of the universe rather than deceleration, which is what is predicted by our normal physical reality. They say they don't understand what dark matter is, but all they have to do is to really go and look at the de Broglie work of the 1920s and the Dirac work of the 1920s, both who won Nobel Prizes. But he talked about a negative energy sea. They couldn't understand what a negative means, but if they think a little more, they'll find that they can. In fact, I've written about this. I should mention on my website, tiller.org, there are at the moment 26 free white papers, one of which deals with this Dirac work and shows how to begin to understand negative energies. So, but again, it's this stuckness, you know. Yeah. They're terribly committed to it, and they will change eventually, but it can be either slow or fast. It'll be faster if the general public put some pressure on them.
You were featured in what, The Bleep, that a lot of us have seen. Have you done a lot of other documentaries or work?
I have done. I have 2 DVDs that are on my website that are accessible on terms of the psychoenergetic science. One is a 7-hour DVD, which was an entire weekend where I was the only speaker, and I talked about the early work. So it's available for sale, and there's PayPal, so people can purchase it if they wish. There are 4 books now in that area, and there are the 27 free white papers. By next week, there'll be 28.
What is that one about?
That one is this broadcast to Germany, the 28th. The 27th is towards a union of logos and mythos. Both were rejected by orthodox science journals. They don't get it. They don't want to get it. So I put them up on my website. So they're free for anybody to access and print out for themselves or their friends or whatever. So this is all going forward, and we're gathering more data every day. We don't have funds, but fortunately the 2 people that work with me, they're longtime Siddha yoga practitioners, and they're at the moment have been willing to work for nothing. So there have been challenges, but we're making progress, real progress.
Since, with the internet, this is something beautiful, and I love doing here on my show too, is, how can we support you? Because there is some people, this reaches people all around the world, Bill, and there must be some, who knows, the synchronicities that can
I have
happen.
on my website a button or something which can take donations, and if the donations are large enough, then I can. I'd have to be in contact with the person. I can tell them how to write the check so that I can send it to the Holos Institute for Health, where Norm Shealy has, and I have I have an account there, so that if they direct it to my psychoenergetic science research, then Norm will write them back, and they can take a tax write-off from it. But certainly, people can be part of this research.
Yeah. And also, I guess, helping to share your white papers also,
yes.
And the research that you have done, all of that also contributes.
Yes, it does contribute. I published a lot of work in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. They have been more open, the alternative medicine, because their work touches these new levels of reality.
Yeah.
So I'm speaking. It's difficult for some of the folks to understand this because they're tied strongly to the orthodox, but still, many do. They're willing to suffer a little confusion.
I think Dr. Larry Dossey also publishes in there.
Yes, but that would be good if Larry was not the person that's reading the. If Larry was the person that was reading the papers that are sent, but the person he has reading those papers is one who is. He has his own axe to grind. Let's put it that way.
But I guess you're connected with Larry Dossey too, right?
Yeah, Larry and I do once in a while communicate. We haven't talked to him in a long time.
He's wonderful.
But we're doing work now. I'm having starting a program on information medicine, which is psychoenergetic science applied to medicine. And working with the Buddha relics and doing experiments on the Buddha relics to show that they're very much like an intention host device. Ooh. And they are left behind by these Buddhist masters, and they have consciousness. Yeah. And we can demonstrate that experimentally. So it really answers it is an answer to the question, is there consciousness continuing after physical death? The answer is yes.
This is a beautiful book. I could totally see that as a book in itself.
Yes, it will be eventually. We're doing more work. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Professor, for this moment.
Well, it was fun.
And I'm glad we were able to do this thanks to your friend Bill to do this.
Yes. So I'm glad to see you. When do you go back from your vacation?
Oh, I'm not on vacation. I'm here to interview several people here on Maui, and then Kauai, and then I'm going to the Quantum Medicine Congress in Honolulu to interview Dr. Emoto, and it will be it's a whole trip.
Well, it is. I mean, quantum is a real thing, but quantum mechanics cannot deal with the real stuff of humans. Not yet. Anyway.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good. Be well.
You too. On this end of normal, regular people.
Right. Okay. I was in industry for 9 years at the Westinghouse Research Lab as an advisory physicist, and then moved to being a full professor with tenure at Stanford University in 1964, and retired from Stanford University in 1998. My last Ph.D. student was in 2000. Generally, my teaching was graduate students rather than undergraduate students, and I had research people. I probably graduated 50 Ph.D. students in that time period that I was there. So I'm a card-carrying orthodoxe scientist, and when I was on my first tour of duty on sabbatical, although I started out as a garden variety professor, the man who brought me in turned very ill, and I was asked to take over as department chair, which I did until I decided to give that up in 1970. Going on sabbatical, I picked up this little book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. by Ostrander and Schroeder, and I knew a great deal about that area because my wife and I became daily meditators in 1964. And we had lots of experiences with psychic phenomena and people. Even though I was department chair, I was still interested in this other. And as I read this book on the plane to my sabbatical, or our sabbatical in Oxford, the thought kept coming into my mind. How might the universe be structured to allow this crazy seeming kind of stuff to naturally coexist with the orthodoxe science that I was doing every day with my graduate students? When I got to Oxford, I started to write the book I went there to write on my orthodox area, which was science of crystallization. And I kept having this same question come into my mind. And it was very distracting. And after about 3 weeks, I decided I'm not going to do this book. I'm going to find out, if I can, how the universe might be constructed to allow this stuff to exist. And so my wife and I, with our daily meditation, which is usually about an hour long,
Hello, Professor Tiller.
hello and good afternoon.
I'm in Hawaii. Where are you right now?
Now I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Ah, love Scottsdale. Beautiful place.
Yes, well, we were in Maui also last week. We got back on the 19th.
Uh-huh. And what is the background behind you? Because you're in front of a painting, aren't you?
We're in a chapel. This is a spiritual center and church, and that's the frontispiece of the chapel.
Ah, beautiful. So yeah. We had a conversation a long time ago, but it wasn't through video. It was on the phone, and I'm very happy today this is on camera. Okay. This is wonderful.
Yeah, well, I'm glad too.
So I would love to speak about the psychoenergetic science, because this is your thing, and I would love to learn more about it. Can you give us a bit of your background and how you came to this kind of science and what it is and how it can help us to bridge what we feel inside, but we haven't yet explained it scientifically?
We would go into meditation and I would hold the brick of the question. How might this universe be structured to allow this stuff to occur? And by the end of the day, end of the hour, usually I'd have some insight, and she would have some insight, and we'd talk a bit, because her insight, although she was not in any way scientific, was always very fruitful. Females are better at psychic stuff than males. And then I'd work all day upstairs in the house we had, trying to decide what experimental data was this insight violating. And by the end of the day, I would have another set of questions. And so the next day we'd go into meditation. I'd hold the primary intention or question, and then I would hold these other questions, just like a brick, like a supplicant, asking the universe for help in understanding. And this went on every day. I did it for 6 months. We did it every day. By the end of the 6 months, I had a model that allowed the two to naturally coexist. But one of the key issues of enlightenment that came was you must get outside of distance time to understand how these two things can naturally coexist. Well, by that time, I was really impressed with how important this area of work mankind, much more important than I thought my normal science was at Stanford. And so I thought, who might I get to commit to working on this, seriously working on it? And I finally decided I couldn't figure out who could do it, and that it had to be me. Well, that was tough. I needed my day job to feed my family. So I decided to give up being department chair to have time. I decided to give up my government committees to have time. I decided to give up my professional committees to have time. And with that block of time, I divided it into 3 parts. Continued experiential development of self. Second, third was to keep looking at the universe to see what the structure looked like, and ultimately mathematically what it might look like. And then the third was to do experiments to keep the theory honest. And so I developed an inside the university life of conventional science and an outside the university life of psychoenergetic science.